So it is Friday afternoon, and I am sitting on my bed wearing the biggest F off sunglasses you can imagine, with all the blinds drawn because I can't stand the light and I feel like I'm dying. And that's just a normal Thursday afternoon. Hi, guys, welcome back to another episode of The Sick Sexy. If you're new to the channel, hi, welcome. My name is Sophia Anna. I post once a week about all things invisible illness, health, dating, and disability. I get to talk to some pretty amazing people along the way as well. But this week on the pod, it's a solo episode. It's a solo episode because this week I'm finally ready to talk about it. So, what do I mean when I say it? Well, when I imagined turning 30, I imagined small children running around and a long white wedding dress. What I didn't imagine was being struck by a 2% rare ischemic stroke. But here we are. So, for this episode, I am finally going to talk about my experience of surviving a ischemic stroke, what the past 6 weeks of my life has looked like, and what the future looks like for me. I'm also going to announce each chapter so that if you're going through a similar experience yourself, you can kind of just skip to each chapter that applies to you. But first, I want to take you back to the beginning. So, for anyone that has basic knowledge of strokes, what sort of things come to mind for you? For me, I was taught the FAST resource as a health worker very early on. And so the FAST resource is FAST, which stands for watch out for facial droop, arm weakness, slurred speech, and call 000 quickly. Now, I want you to keep those signs in mind for me, all right? So, for those of you who don't know me, outside of my podcast, I work in the health industry as a caseworker. And a normal day for me looked like some pretty hard, complex client inquiries. I worked 40-hour weeks, mainly working from home. I had a really active social life. I drove a lot, went to the gym 3 days a week. Normal 30-year-old people things. And then on the 19th of October, my life changed forever. So basically, I was sitting in bed watching a movie, minding my own business, eating some chocolate, when I suffered a rare ischemic stroke. The world blurred. I lost my ability to walk. And as I cried out for help between throwing up and fighting the urge to slip into unconsciousness, I felt like my brain was literally shutting down. And I remember as I was lying on my bed, the darkness came over me. And I remember thinking that there's no light at the end of the tunnel when you're dying, it's just darkness. But this song came to me in that moment, and the song was Save Me From Myself by Christina Aguilera. And that would then become a song that was instrumental in my recovery because I would sing it to myself to remember how to speak. So that song came to me as I was basically trying not to die. So I remember when the paramedics arrived, my blood pressure was really high. My blood sugar levels were sitting at a 10, which is, for anyone that knows anything about blood sugar levels, that's incredibly high. I was constantly vomiting, and I just remember saying over and over again, I think I'm dying. I feel like I'm dying. So I arrive at the hospital. I wait 8 hours to see a doctor. 8. I'm told I had vertigo and that there was nothing wrong with me, basically, that I didn't need any follow up scans. And then I was discharged home in a wheelchair, even though I literally couldn't walk. And then for the next 5 days, between kind of trying to work from home and lead a semi normal life, I was going through a lot of personal, big life changes in that time as well. So trying to navigate that. I was continually suffering my stroke during that time. And I remember very vividly one night, about 5 days after that initial stroke, I lost vision in my left eye. And it was then that I was like, no, nah, I've got to call an ambulance again. There's something not right with this. And thankfully, a doctor took a chance on me and gave me an MRI scan of my brain. And it was funny because when I got to the hospital, they were saying things like, oh, you could have meningitis, you could have an infection. Like they just didn't know what was wrong. They were like, maybe we should put like a puncture in your spine, like a lumbar spine puncture to see if you have this rare infection. And then it was just by chance because I had said to the doctor, look, I had begged my GP for an MRI scan because I'm like, something isn't right and no one's listening to me. And I had told the emergency doctors this, and they said, well, if you've got an MRI scan booked for tomorrow, let's just send you home tonight. This was at like 2 o'clock in the morning. Again, I could barely see, I could barely walk. And the doctors were like, do you want to call a taxi? Because I couldn't drive. And I remember getting up off the bed and I just collapsed in the doctor's arms. And it was in that moment that they decided actually they're going to scan my brain and see what's happening. It was then that they discovered I had suffered a cervical vertebral dissection, which is a really fancy way of saying that my major artery that runs along my neck tore, causing a clot to travel to my cerebellum and block blood flow. And that's known as an ischemic stroke. When I got to my hospital, my doctors told me at that moment I nearly didn't make it. But to the outward eye, aside from walking like I'm drunk, you can't tell I've had a stroke. I've got no facial drooping, I have no slurred speech, no arm weakness, and I almost didn't call 000 in time. And for anyone listening to this, I don't want you to make that same mistake. Doctors told me I was stressed, that I was fine, that women get vertigo all the time, that I'm young. And I think when you're given a wrong diagnosis the first time, it's really easy to ignore your gut instinct and trust other people. But my advice to you is if something doesn't feel right, act on it because you know your body better than anyone. So here we are, like 7 weeks later, and I want to talk to you about what my life looks like now, what got me through those first 48 hours when I thought I was not going to make it, and going through a stroke at such a young age and how that impacts and affects your life. So I'm going to start off with what living in hospital for 3 weeks was like. So I was in hospital for nearly a month, and during that time, it was incredibly stressful because it was really challenging having to explain to nurses and doctors that I was actually deeply unwell because you just couldn't tell. But all I knew was that when I felt like my brain was shutting down, I tried to do things that would remind me of who I was. And what I mean by that is we don't realize how much of our brains impact on our identity and our sense of self. And I'm so grateful for my brain and all the things it does for me and gives me because without your brain, you don't have personality, you don't have emotions, you don't have executive functioning. Like our brains are responsible for so much. And when you go through a brain injury like I have, you kind of have to relearn who you are again. And that was really terrifying for me. But there were some key things about my personality that remained the same. And those were the things that I held on to try and, I guess, stay grounded. So, one of the first things I did when I regained consciousness and was put on medication was I started singing again. So, growing up, my dad was a musician and still is. And we would listen to, 90s music and feel good music. And Christina Aguilera was a big, big part of that. And so in hospital, I started singing Save Me From Myself. It's a beautiful, beautiful song. Um, it's a song that's very like deep to my heart now because of I feel that it like got me through that experience basically. And I guess to give you an example of the power of music and I guess creativity, Amelia Clark, who is a famous actress, also went through a brain injury in her early 20s. And she said in an interview that the only thing that kind of kept her brain from shutting down was her ability to recite her lines. And that's how I felt with music, because I truly believe that without music, I wouldn't be the same person that I am today. I wouldn't have regained my functioning as much as I have. So, music was a big part of my recovery process. And so, when I didn't have physiotherapists, occupational therapists, psychologists, the whole team of doctors coming in every 5 minutes to get me to do stuff for my recovery, I would sit by the window, and I had this beautiful window overlooking this train station. And I kind of, my mum used to call me a bit like a caged bird, like a caged butterfly, because I couldn't leave the hospital. But I would sit by the window and I would basically just sing to myself. And, after a few weeks of being in hospital, you do get a little bit confident and you don't care anymore. So I would like leave the door open of my room, and visitors would walk past to visit other patients, and they would stop and listen to me singing. And it was really cute. I had quite a few people being like, oh, you've got such a beautiful voice. And I would have the dinner ladies come in and join in and stuff. And it was very cute and it was very surreal. And during that time as well, there was, as I said, there was a lot going on in my personal life, which I won't go into detail, but stress and anxiety has a large impact on how you recover and heal. And so, definitely in that first week, it was incredibly stressful for me. But I will say that having people around me that loved me made such an impact on my recovery. And, they say that, your brain is like really neuroplastic, so it can learn things really quickly. And I truly believe that being around people that filled me with love and happiness made such an impact to my recovery and growth, because I was kind of releasing feel good hormones during a time when, yeah, I didn't know if I was going to make it. So that was really beautiful to be around my friends and just feel not so alone. Because I think something that we don't talk about in brain injuries is how socially isolated you feel. So that was my experience living in hospital. I want to touch on, I guess, what the physical symptoms are of my stroke, because you can't see anything. People kind of assume that I'm okay. And this very early on happened to me when a nurse walked past my room and she said to me that she had just come from seeing another stroke survivor, and she felt really bad because they were really unwell. They'd lost ability of moving their body. And she looked at me and she said, well, it's kind of lucky that you didn't have a real stroke. And in that moment, my heart sunk, because I was like, if this is what a nurse thinks about me, if this is what a nurse thinks about someone that's just had an ischemic stroke, a rare stroke, um, this is gonna be the rest of my life. Like, I'm going to go through the rest of my life and just have people not believe me. And it was really painful to hear that in that moment, but it also really inspired me to tell the truth. And I guess that's why it's so important that we have platforms like the Sick Sexy, so that we can break those stigmas and, make people understand that just because you can't see something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And as she said this to me, my symptoms were really bad. So I guess to give you an idea of like what does a cervical dissection, what does a stroke in your cerebellum feel like, because you can't see it. The cerebellum is a part of your brain that affects your ability to walk and coordinate and know where you are in space, but it also has a lot to do with your emotional regulation as well. So when I survived the clot, I basically lost my ability to know where I am in space. So that means that if I'm tired, after a couple of hours, I will start to walk into things. I will walk into walls, I will walk into the tree, my brain tells me to walk left and I will walk into the middle of the road, and I can't control that. In addition to that, I have the worst vertigo and dizziness. Like every time I close my eyes, I feel like I'm on a sailboat with no raft and I'm going white water rafting down a stream and I have no control. It feels like you're constantly falling out of the sky. And it's a distressing feeling at the best of times, but it's even more terrifying when you're trying to go to sleep at night. So that's how I feel 24 hours of the day. I feel like I'm simultaneously falling out of the sky, and my brain tells me to do weird things like walk the wrong way. And I've noticed that my symptoms get worse when I'm tired or when I'm really sad. And also, on the topic of sadness, um, when your cerebellum is affected, it affects your ability to emotionally regulate. So, whereas before I might get upset about something and be able to regulate my emotions, I now have no control over that whatsoever, which, as I'm sure you can understand, is very frustrating. And so, if something upsets me, I will start crying. My body will erupt in hives, and there's really no way to anticipate when it's coming on. And it's something that I've worked really hard on over the past 6 weeks, through music, through mindfulness, through meditation, through being around people that make me feel good. But like anything in life, you don't always have control over it. So it's definitely something that I'm working on. I guess the next chapter I want to talk about is, like medication. So I now rattle from medication. And what I mean by that is when I left hospital, I was on two blood thinners, an antacid, laxatives, and an antidepressant. I've managed to limit some of that medication now, but I'm still on, a considerable amount for a young, otherwise healthy 30-year-old woman. Before I this happened to me, I, worked in pharmacy and I kind of knew like, oh, you take medication when you get old. And it is a very sobering experience to now be the person that has a jar of medication that they need to take every day. It's definitely made me more aware and kind to that people from all walks of life sometimes need extra help to get through their day, and whether that's medication or something else, it's definitely taught me to be kinder. But yeah, I'm on all of this, different kind of medication. The blood thinners specifically help to reduce the likelihood of me having another stroke. And because of where the clot is in my artery, doctors have told me that the clot might never go away, but that the blood thinner stops that from moving elsewhere throughout my brain and causing even more damage. So that's why I'm on the blood thinners. But the annoying thing about being on blood thinners is, um, I'll go to sleep and I'll wake up with a cut, and I won't know how I cut myself. I won't know what I rubbed against, and I'll be bleeding. And that's a consideration that you just have to have on blood thinners, is that you need to be aware that you could hurt yourself at any minute. So I have to be, quite aware of like my body and, being careful with myself. I also want to, I guess, touch on the auditory overload and how earbuds and sunglasses have saved my life. Oh my God. I never really understood how much our brains filter out noise and sound. And I guess the only way I can explain it is, imagine you're in a really, really loud nightclub, yeah? And you're standing near, and we've all done this as teenagers and young people. Don't act like you haven't been there. We've all been there where we've stood too close to the speaker and we've been drunk, probably, maybe I was. And we've gone home that night and we've got just this constant like ringing in our ears. Imagine that times 1,000. And that is what everyday life feels like for me as soon as I leave my house. So Auditory overload is a real sensation that occurs in strokes, and it's where you're basically, because your brain is impaired, it can't process all the outside noises and people's voices and things. And so you get overwhelmed very, very quickly. And again, that impacts on your ability to emotionally regulate. So if I've got three people talking at me and it's also bright outside and there's a lot of loud noises, instead of knowing what to do in that moment, my brain starts to shut down and I just go into a panic and have started crying in the past because it's quite distressing. I've now kind of learnt that when I get to that point, I then remove myself from that environment and have to go somewhere quiet. But it basically feels like my ears are bleeding and my brain is on fire. So wearing earbuds has really helped with this. The brand that I use is called Loop. They are fantastic, and massive sunglasses. I've always been a sunglasses girl, but even more so now. One of the challenges of having a stroke and surviving something like this is other people's perceptions of you change. And so when I walk into a shopping centre and I'm wearing sunglasses, I get dirty looks because people assume that I'm being rude. And I have really had to like stop myself from explaining myself in situations. So, for example, last week I walked into a cafe for the first time in a really, really long time. And when I stood up from sitting down, I fell over. And people around me were like, "What's wrong with that girl?" Like people were giving me strange looks. And like this, I remember this old couple like touched me on the shoulder and they're like, "What's wrong with you? Like, are you okay?" And I just started crying and I was like, "Hey guys, look, I've had a stroke. Like, I'm trying my best here." But the reality is no one has a right to the insight of your life. And so I'm aware now that I have to be careful who I share information with. But it can be really challenging feeling like, because to the outward eye, I just look like I'm drunk and disorderly. And that can be really challenging because I don't have any control over that. And I guess on the topic of like societal stigma, I've also found that my family and friends have had a really hard time understanding what I'm going through. And I've had friends say things like, watch where you're going, or, be careful. And it comes from a place of love, but it's really frustrating because, when you have a brain injury, you can't control what's going on inside your brain. Just like when you have a broken bone, you can't control that movement in your leg, for example. And so constantly feeling like I have to be, like I have to act a certain way is really like it can be emotionally taxing. And so I think that's why it's really important to continue to talk about our symptoms and what we go through so that people get an understanding of, what that actually looks like, what your diagnosis looks like. So sunglasses and earbuds have been, sorry, that's my cat, if you guys can hear him squealing in the background. Earbuds and sunglasses have really gotten me through some tough days. They also help the nystagmus that I have. So, nystagmus is an involuntary eye twitch that you can suffer with a stroke, and it's something that I deal with every single day. So freaking annoying. So, sunnies have helped me to like deal with that as well. Um, but in terms of, and I guess like just backtracking to like the impact of trauma on the brain. So I didn't realize before having a brain injury how much your emotions actually impact on your recovery. And so if you're really stressed and sad, your brain's not going to respond in the way that it normally would. And so to give you an example, Um, I recently, and I've had about 4 brain scans in the past month. My most recent one was my most traumatic because as soon as I lie down, I have that feeling that I'm falling out of the sky. And it made me quite distressed. And so I got quite hot and my blood pressure got quite high. And that brought on all my symptoms of wanting to throw up and feeling like my brain was on fire. And I remember crying and, trying to throw up at the same time, which, is very, very glamorous. And thinking, wow, it's phenomenal how much stress plays an impact and a role on brain recovery and trauma for that matter as well. And so when I talk about trauma, what I mean is when you've gone through any kind of stressful life event, your brain kind of stores that information and your mind stores that information. And so when you've had an injury like this, sometimes your mind and your brain forget to communicate with each other. And so sometimes, or I say sometimes, I'm actually minimizing it. It happens every single night. My brain replays my stroke. It replays the night that I got sick, and it makes me feel like I'm having a stroke again. And as I'm sure you can imagine, that is very upsetting and can cause me a lot of anxiety. But it is your mind's response to try and understand what it's gone through. And as a result, it has a lot of trouble talking to your brain and telling your brain that it's okay, basically. So some of the ways that I've really learnt to support myself is through, talking to people about it. So having therapy through my rehabilitation program, but also practicing mindfulness. And, when people imagine mindfulness, they think, like drawing on a piece of paper and, kind of just focusing in the moment and not putting your attention anywhere else. Mindfulness for me has always been music. So I always, 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 always come back to music. And I find that when I sing or when I listen to music that I like and that I enjoy, my symptoms actually lessen. Or not that they're not there anymore, but that my consciousness and my thought process is on something else. And it's the same with podcasting. 3 weeks after I had my stroke, I met this amazing person called Joe Borge. If you haven't heard of him rather, he runs a podcast called Neuro Nerds. And Joe is also a brain injury survivor. He's a fantastic dude, and we found each other through the internet. And I interviewed him for The Sick Sexy. If you haven't heard the episode, it's the one before this one. We sat down and we had a very, very candid conversation. And I actually interviewed him while I was still in hospital. And I remember at the time of the interview, he said to me, like, you're a superwoman. Like, people don't do what you do. And that meant a lot to hear because in those moments, sometimes even I was like, how am I doing this? Like, how am I finding the words to ask another human being questions when I can't even process what's going on inside my own brain? And I always come back to if you love something enough, that love for what you want to do will override any pain you're going through. And that's why, I think for a lot of different people, that can be like religion. That's why they say, prayer is so powerful in moments of darkness, in moments of stress. I think whatever you love in life, as long as you hold on to that, and that doesn't need to be it doesn't need to be prayer. It could be music, it could be sport, it could be like whatever it is. It's so important because I think our brains are like, I guess, like little children almost. Like they need to be protected and loved in order to function healthily. And I want to round off this episode and just touch on the power of love and its impact on the brain because holy shit, like love in all aspects is so so crucial to brain recovery and brain health. And we know that if you're in love, your brain literally lights up like a mother effing Christmas tree. Like that's not woo woo, that's literally science. So like when you're in love, you release dopamine, you release adrenaline, you release norepinephrine, you release all these wonderful hormones that help to light up your brain and help you to increase blood flow to those areas, but also like help you to feel good about yourself, help you to bond to people, help you to, feel stimulated. And I'm just so incredibly grateful for the people in my life because And I always get emotional when I talk about this because love is a real tangible thing. And if you have it in your life, it can literally heal you. Like it can literally change your brain chemistry. And I didn't realize how much that meant to me until after I got sick. Because, as I said, when you go through something like this, it can be so isolating and people don't understand what you're going through and people judge you and make all sorts of, misunderstandings about what it actually means to live with this kind of trauma. But when you have someone who truly sees you and truly loves you for who you are, it will make the biggest difference to your recovery. So even if you are a healthy person and you're not going through a brain injury, the power of love is so important. The power of having people in your space that love you and care about you, who get you, who see you. And that doesn't just have to be romantic love, that can be friendship, that can be your community, whatever it is, spirituality. But have people in your corner who get it, because I promise you, like, it is so much more powerful than you think. So, guys, oh my God, that is it for me. I have rambled way too much this week on The Sick Sexy. This was a really challenging episode for me to film and talk about, but so important because my brain injury is ever evolving, and so every single day I have new symptoms. I get hives, I lose weakness in my arms, sometimes I forget how to swallow. Like every day it's something new. And what I say to people, like, a stroke is not like a broken bone. You don't just get better, you have ups and downs. And that's why it was really important for me to finally sit down and talk about it, because my life has changed so much over the past 7 weeks and it is going to continue to change. Once you have a stroke, your life is never the same again. That's literally why they call it life changing, because your life changes forever. And as this progresses, I'm sure I will have new experiences to update you guys with each week. But in the meantime, if you enjoyed this episode, you related to anything that we talked about today, please hit me a message on Instagram, YouTube, even Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. I would absolutely love to hear from you. And until next time, I'll catch you this time next week on The Sick Sexy.